All right, here we go. This is 16th notes, and these aren't too bad. I like teaching the rhythmic stuff, being the drummer that I am. We've already learned about whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, and then we just started to get into eighth notes a little bit, which had either one flag or one beam. 16th notes look pretty similar, but we're just going to add another flag or another beam. So they've kind of got the notation at the top of the page, page 62, and they do a much cleaner job of it than I will on my little whiteboard, but you can see what the notes look like. And in the same way that we did with eighth notes, if you have a single 16th note by itself, lonely, you can draw it with the two flags. And let's not forget that the wind is always blowing from the left to the right on the staff. If you have consecutive 16th notes that can be grouped together in beats, then we will use beams, kind of like they're doing right here. So there's 4 16th notes beamed together. Okay, let's talk about the counting. Basically, every musician that I know counts 16th notes the same way. And it's the first way that they have on the page here. So we have these syllables, one, E, and which are abbreviated with the one E, the ampersand, and the And I sometimes abbreviate them this way. So if I do it this way out of habit, I apologize, but I can't help myself. With the plus sign being the and, one E and a. So one E and a. And if you keep going, let's say we were in 4/4 time signature. It would be 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a, right? The book also mentions another system of counting, which they tried to initiate back when I was a student teacher a very, very long time ago. And it was in principle, it was a good idea. They were trying to give some practice for people who play wind instruments to practice tonguing and articulation for playing a 16th note on a wind instrument. But it never really sort of caught on outside of that practice. So really, again, like I said, most musicians that I know, if they come across 16th notes, when they subdivide, they count using these syllables. So that's what I'm going to do in this class too. All right, so they're showing you the different ways you can draw them. Obviously, if the note head is below the middle line, the stems are going to go up, and so the beams are going to be, relative to the stems. Here we have the two flags, and once again, the wind is always blowing that direction, so the flags should never go the other way. That's one of my big pet peeves, as you probably know. Here, they're showing us that 16th notes can be beamed also with eighth notes. So in the first example, we have an eighth note with one beam and two 16th notes. So let's not forget that eighth notes are a subdivision of the quarter note, which we counted 1 and 2 and. So if we start with an eighth note, the next count after an eighth note would be the and. Yeah? So we have 1 and a. And they're kind of putting the E in parentheses. You can subdivide with your mouth, but understand that an eighth note is going to last or be articulated this way. 1 E and 2 E and 1 E and 2 E and So eighth notes take up the space of two 16th notes. So here we have 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and right? Or the opposite, where we start with two 16th notes and beam them together with an eighth note. So this would be 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and And it gets pretty fun because you can start to put together different combinations There's actually one more that the book doesn't give you. It's kind of more tricky, but I'll show it to you because why not? Check that out. Here we have a 16th note with two beams, and the beam is kind of floating in space. The note in the middle is an 8th note. It only has one beam. And then the note at the end is another 16th note. So if I write out the counting, it looks like this. The first note gets the 1. Then the middle note is the E and the last note is the So I'll count it and I'll clap it for you. It sounds like this. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and So they're kind of fun little building blocks, 16th notes. And I would practice counting and clapping or performing all the different combinations, like the two that are in the book. Obviously, you can also do all 4, right? So should I do it all? Let me do them all. Here. So that would be all of the 16th notes, 1 E and a. Make this 2. 3 E and 4 E and Sometimes I like to put a little line underneath the counts that are the 8th note because they're taking up the space of 2 16ths, right? So if I play this whole measure here, we've got 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and. How about if I do it slower? Ready? And 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and. So in the beginning, you really do have to say it out loud, count these rhythms out, and then clap them or perform them to kind of put your body, with it. It really helps to say it and to play it at the same time. And it's hard. It's not easy. But just like reading words from a book, eventually I get to the point where I don't have to count these every syllable. I can see what the pattern is and I know what it sounds like. Just the same way when you read a book, you don't have to sound out every word. You can read the word as opposed to sounding out the word. So when I see this line, I see daga 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 da, because that's the language that I know of 16th notes. And you can learn to read them that quickly as well. It just takes some practice to get the words in your mind and in your hands. All right, so what they have here in the book is some exercises for adding stems with flags or beams to make them 16th notes. Some math for you here, and kind of some math over here as well, where you're going to write one note that's going to be equal to the value of the notes on the other side of the equation. So see if you can come up with the answers to the bottom of page 62. On page 63, it's the same topic, but just like everything, we have to be able to notate silence as well as notating sound. So the 16th note rest has the same values as 16th note. It looks like a stick with 2 little toes sticking out of it. And so you can see here, each one of those has the value of a 16th note. So 1 E and There's a quarter rest. The quarter rest lasts for 1 entire beat. So if we're subdividing 16th notes, we would say 2 E and that quarter rest would take up all of that space, right? Same thing here, right? 3 E and then quarter rest, 4 E and 4 16th note rests equals 1 quarter note rest. So this is when things start to get interesting and maybe kind of tricky. Let's look at number 1. And I'm going to subdivide all the way through, 16th notes all the way through. And then I'll clap the rhythm and I'll probably run out of breath. Here we go. Ready? And go. And 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and Ooh, a lot of counting. Take it slow. Figure out each measure. The reason that I'm subdividing is because if I don't subdivide, I might cheat the time. When I get to these notes, it seems really slow. You know, right here at bar 3, 1 E and 2 E and 3. It seems like it's taking forever. But if I don't say all the subdivisions, I might just go 1 and 3 and then my time feel, my steady pulse of time kind of gets thrown out the window. So practice counting aloud and clapping these rhythms, and try to be honest with yourself and don't leave stuff out. If you subdivide all the 16th notes and simply clap when it's asking you to clap, hopefully you'll find the right spot. And I think there's probably some counting exercises. I guess there's nothing in between there. Maybe I'll come up with some and send them to you guys. But at least try to do the stuff that's at the bottom of the page. Okay? Let's do page 64. This involves the 16th note. And it should be similar to you because we've already done dotted half notes. And we've done dotted quarters. Now we're going to do the dotted eighth note. And remember that when you add a dot after a note, it increases its length by half its value. So here's an example of what we've learned so far. If you take a half note, you put a dot after it, that's essentially the same as a half note plus a quarter, which equals 3 beats. Quarter note, tied to an eighth note, 1.5 beats. That's what you get with a dotted quarter note. All right, this new one, kind of tricky. We're taking an eighth note and we're adding a dot. A dot adds half the value. Half of an eighth note is a 16th note. So we're adding together, we're tying together eighth note plus a 16th note. So it says 3/4 of a beat. I guess that's true. If you subdivide into 4 parts, the eighth note is 2 of those. The dot adds 1 more. So we have 3/4 of a whole beat that we've subdivided. So look at the page. We have an eighth note that is beamed with a dot. So that's getting the 1 E and then we have a 16th note with that little beam that's hanging in midair, and that's landing on the So if I say this and I play this, it sounds like this. 1 E and 1 E and 2 E and right? Same thing here. 1 E and 2. So that 16th note lands on the last subdivision. The dotted eighth note takes up the first 3 subdivisions. The eighth note plus the dot. Okay. It's kind of tricky. I'm going to clap this rhythm for you. 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And 1 E and 2 E and 3 and 4. And 1, 2, 3 and 4. And 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have a dotted eighth note in the first measure. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and in the second measure we have some dotted eighths and 16th notes. 1 E and 2 E and 3 and 4 and. So it's kind of tricky because we've got a lot of dotted notes, but what they're attached to changes their value. So you kind of have to practice these. Down here, they've given you some rhythms where you can add the bar lines. And basically with this stuff, you just want it to add up to whatever that top number is. So 3/4 time, we want 3 beats in a measure. The dotted eighth and the 16th are all kind of beamed together. Can you kind of see how it's all beamed together? So that's like one unit. That's one beat. So there's a beat, and the quarter note is a beat. So then we would draw a bar line, right? So we'll kind of add this on to the 16th note lesson. See if you can get it. Practice these, count them really slow. And if you have questions, maybe I can help you in our next online class. All right, good luck. See you soon.